Welcome to Wizard's video all about understanding the defaults. By now, you've had a little experience with Matte Designer, and you'll be pleased to know that there are some changes you can make in the default that will help Matte Designer work a little bit more like you would like it to work. Here we are on the main screen of Matte Designer. Click Application Defaults at the bottom, and the default screen opens. On the left is a list of categories. If you click one, you can see that on the right is a list of all the changes that you can make. We'll begin by talking about the changes you might consider under Editor. So click on Editor. Let's begin with these 4 settings at the bottom. These buttons correspond to the settings of the toggles at the lower right of the editor. Dynamic Outsides is unchecked. If you're not familiar with Dynamic Outsides, it is a feature that builds the specified borders around whatever array of openings you have, and it adjusts the outside automatically as you are making changes to the layout. You are wise to leave it unchecked. Then, when you want to use it, you click the toggle under the editor. The second two are Borders Active and Guides Active. This is nothing more than, do you want the borders, the snapping properties of the borders and the snapping properties of the guides to be active? Leave these 2 choices checked. The bottom one is Bottom Layer XY. This is a rather cryptic shorthand for, do you want the reference point for the guides and for the alignment buttons to be the bottom layer of a multiple opening mat or the top layer? If you leave bottom layer XY checked, as you see it here, that means that the reference point for the alignment tools will be the bottom layer of an opening. I think a better idea is to uncheck it. That way, the reference point for the guides and for the alignment tools will be the top layer of a multiple opening mat. This makes aligning multiple opening designs a little bit easier. After a little while, we'll go to Matte Designer to see exactly what changes these default changes have affected. At the top, the choice is Remember Previous versus Start with Settings. Start with Settings is checked, and I believe that you should leave it checked. That means nothing more than every time you come to the Edit screen, these 4 choices below are set up exactly as you have them here. You will have a little consistency with Matte Designer that will add to peace of mind as you're working. So, to recap, on the editor, keep Start with Settings checked. Keep Dynamic Outsides unchecked. Leave Borders Active and Guides Active checked. And uncheck Bottom Layer XY. When you're done making changes in default, click OK. The changes will be registered, and you can continue on with your work in Matte Designer. Before we click OK, however, let's look at the new opening screen and some of the changes we might make there. The first is more of an explanation. Opening size first is nothing more than, on the new opening screen, do you want the opening size on top or do you want the outside size on top? As you make changes in the fields below, whatever size, the opening size or the outside size, is on top will remain unchanged when you make changes below. So we are picture framers here. It seems most often that we want the opening size to remain constant, so I believe you're wise to leave opening size first checked. The next choice I would like you to consider is borders order. Bottom top sides or top sides bottom. Here is the choice. If you want to make a wide bottom mat and you leave bottom top sides checked, you'll type in 3 inches for the bottom. Then you'll hit the Tab key on the keyboard, and all 3 of the fields will fill in with 3 inches. Then you'll need to tab down to the top and change it to 2.5. You'll need to tab to the sides and change the sides to 2.5. So you'll need to make 2 changes. If you would do as I recommend, though, and click top sides, bottom in defaults. That means when you type in 2.5 in the top and then hit the Tab key on the keyboard, all three of these fields will fill in with 2.5. Then when you tab down to the bottom, the only one you'll need to change is the bottom in order to make it wider. The last one I would like you to consider is auto-label multi-openings. That's nothing more than it labels each opening with the size of the item. And this is pretty handy if you're working with typical openings. However, if you do fairly detailed work, for instance, if you work with individual debossed letters, for instance, it will label each item in the design. And sometimes the design becomes overly cluttered with all of these labels on them. My advice to you is to uncheck Auto Label Multi-Openings. If you ever need it, come back to the defaults and turn it on. So, recapping the recommendation, keep opening size first checked. Under Borders Order, select top, sides, bottom, and uncheck Auto Label Multi-Openings. Now let's click OK to register our changes and to take a look in Matte Designer at exactly what we've done. So on the main screen, clicking, the new opening screen will open where, as you can see, opening size is up on top because in default, opening size first was checked. So let's make the opening 8 by 11, and on the borders you see that it's top, sides, bottom. So we type 2.5 inches into the top, hit the Tab key on the keyboard. They all fill in. Tab down to the bottom where we enter 3, and we've designed the mat with the fewest keystrokes possible. And as you can see, it draws a picture once the arithmetic is all done, and we click OK to send it to the editing screen where we can see some of the changes that we've made there too. Now, these are the 4 toggles that were set by the 4 default settings that we discussed in the default section. The top one is Dynamic Outsides. Notice that the button is gray and dull and lifeless. That means it's inactive. So as I add another opening and move it around, you can see that the outside size remains constant until I click the toggle and activate Dynamic Outsides. Now I want to space these 2 openings, and I want them to be 3/4 of an inch apart. So I'm going to select both of them and then click the Alignment tab, and in the Space Horizontally field you can see that it's already set with 3/4 of an inch. So when I click the Space Horizontally button, the 2 openings will be 3/4 of an inch apart as measured on the top layer. That is what we were aiming towards when we set the default of bottom layer XY. We unchecked it so that these tools would reference the top layer of a multi-layer design. And this is the button down here, the positioning button, and you can see that it points up, indicating that it's the top layer that is the reference point. Just to demonstrate, I'm going to click it, and notice that it now points down, indicating that now the bottom layer will be the reference point. So when I click the Space Horizontally button again, you can see that it will reference the bottom layer, and it will be 3/4 of an inch wide as measured on the bottom layer, which is not a particularly good design. Back to the default screen. The next section I would like to bring to your attention is under Cutting. When Matte Designer comes out of the box, Remember Previous is checked, and it's the same situation as we had before. Remember Previous versus Start with Settings. Here is the scenario. Let's say that you cut a mat and you cut it from the front. You click Cut from Front on the cut screen, and then you leave the cut screen and you come back a little bit later to cut another mat. If Remember Previous was checked, that change that you made will persist, and the next mat you cut will cut from the front, and that's not always a good thing. In a normal picture frame shop, I would suggest that you click Start with Settings. That way, all of these options will be set up exactly the way that you expect them to be every time you come to the Cutting Preview screen. There are a few more settings I would like to bring to your attention. Under Sizes, there is really not much that we don't change every time we design a mat, but there is a question that we get all the time. Actually, it's 2 questions. One is, How do I set the program so that it always cuts the outside? And of course, the other question is, how do I set the program so that the program never cuts the outside? And they do it right here. Here is the cut the outside button. You are able to, in default, choose to cut the outside or not cut the outside, and it will save you a click or two as you are designing a map. Realize, though, that you are always able, both on the cutting preview screen and on the editing screen, you are able to choose cut the outside there as well. So by setting it in the defaults, you are not closing off any options. Another one I'd like to bring to your attention is under borders. If you click Lock Borders, that will make it so you do not inadvertently grab the corner of the borders and drag it to a new position and accidentally change the border width. Another one is under Global. You can see there's a number of interesting things here. If you click Set New Locale, you can choose to run the software in another language. We will continue in English. Under Unit of Measurement, click the drop-down arrow, and you can run this software in centimeters or millimeters. We get a lot of questions about layer direction. If you click the drop-down arrow, you can see that the choices are bottom-up or top-down. This is nothing more than on a 2 or a 3 layer mat, do you want the top one to cut first or do you want the bottom one to cut first? This is a pretty trivial choice for most people. Leave bottom-up checked and everything will be just fine. The last one I want to show you is password check. In a large shop, very often there is an administrator who would like to set a password for the default and the configuration so that unauthorized people don't make any changes here, because some of these settings are relatively important. There are many other choices that you might choose to make in the default section. These are the ones, however, that affect mostly the way that the designing goes and the way that you work with Mat Designer. Never hesitate to call the people at customer support. We're as close as 888-855-3335.